Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had someone ask the other day on the Facebook fan page, hey Jason, how could you possibly make a ludicrous statement like the squat is probably better for your calves than calf raises are? The squat's not even a full range of motion exercise for the calves. That's a good question, so let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Now the ironic part there is that neither is a calf raise. Calf raise is not a full range of motion exercise for the calves either. People say, but if your ankle moves, well, in what world do you guys think the calves are only involved in movement of the ankle? That's already where people are messing up. That's where people are messing up. But you know what's interesting first, I think I'm going to flip in some data Brett Contreras pulled with some EMG data looking at calves, because he tried to do a series of videos where he took every major muscle in the body and wanted to see where the most muscle activation and stuff was with different exercises. And ironically, a really lightweight 225 squat produced results on the peak activity that was better than all the calf raises. Now that's a 225 squat. Keep in mind, a lot of his things he used different weights, and obviously his weight goes up. Generally, not always, but in the vast majority of cases when you compare different weights, you got better muscle activation. Now 225 squat was really light for test subjects involved, because so a lot of the squats were done with 315 or higher, and they also compared them to that. But he just did the lightweight one there to see what happened. You have better activity in the calves. And for a lot of people, that's going to seem counterintuitive. They're going to be like, what does a squat have to do with the calves other than a little bit of dorsiflexion, going on at the, on your way down, like as you get near the bottom? It's a good question. It's a great question, because it does seem like an issue there, because for a lot of people, like, well, it's a partial. And you've always said that heavy partials produce less muscle activation than a full range of motion exercise, right? But let's go back over to the point that people forget. What is it they forget? When we talk about arms, just like we've discussed that in the past, of the correct way to do a curl is to come up and come higher up, right? Why? Because the bicep doesn't just work the elbow. The tricep doesn't just work the elbow. In other words, the biceps and triceps, if you go look at the anatomy and their functions, they're not responsible for just elbow flexion and extension, right? That's not all they do. They have connections up in the shoulder. Now you take something like the tricep. What does pretty much everyone who's studied biomechanics or anatomy, physiology, all this stuff know about the triceps? If you just do arms stuck at the side, any sort of tricep extension where you just bend the elbows, what happens? You get less recruitment in the triceps. Why? Because the long head of the tricep doesn't get effectively recruited doing that. It gets some activity, right? It gets some activity, but it's the biggest of the heads of the tricep. The lateral and the medial head do the majority of the work if you're just extending the elbows. You actually need the shoulder movement to activate the long head, the biggest head of the tricep, to fully activate it. It's required. Now we're going to go somewhere with this. Same thing with the bicep. There's one of the heads of the bicep that is involved with shoulder rotation, right? It is involved with it directly. And so in other to fully recruit every muscle fiber available in the biceps and all the heads, what do you have to do? You can't just bend the elbow. You need that other movement. One of the reasons chin-ups destroy curls when we study them on EMGs. That's why there is no curl in the world that can compete with a weighted chin-up. There's no curl that exists that competes with a weighted chin-up for activity. Because most curls, you're doing this, and even if you are doing some shoulder movement, you're not getting as much as you are on a chin-up. The chin-up destroys curls in most studies that look at EMGs, the majority of curl types. Now, you guys see where I'm about to go with this? Did anyone here think that the only thing the calf does is bend your ankle? No, it's involved in knee flexion. It's involved in knee flexion. See, that's the ironic thing. All your exercises, your big compound movements that involve using the quads, it's almost impossible to isolate the quads, isn't it? The only way to isolate the quads is on a leg extension machine, and that produces inferior results. It doesn't even produce as much total quad activation usually as a squat, a leg press, anything else. It's a terrible exercise, an unnatural movement pattern. Muscles are designed to work in unison. And that also involves attempting to isolate them. There are a lot of these muscles, when you attempt to isolate them, that aren't designed to work in isolation. Calves are a perfect example. Your calves are not designed to work in isolation. They won't work in isolation. You get, when you try to isolate the calf with just the ankle by not using the knee flexion also, you get inferior results on the EMG. It shows it. It can't contract as much because you're not using the whole muscle. It's designed to work as part of knee flexion. It's partly involved in knee flexion. So therefore, any exercise that recruits the hamstring in knee flexion also recruits the calves. And standing and seated doesn't fix the problem because you're static there. Yeah, you're hitting different angles with the muscle, but you're static. You're not actually using it as part of the movement because your knee is fixed. So even if you're seated and you have it bent, the knee is fixed. You don't have a dynamic component to it. That's part of the function of the gastrocnemius. So yes, the ankle isn't moving as far. It isn't moving as far. But it still gives better activity because it's hitting two different functions instead of just one. So anytime you try to take any of these muscles in the body and you make this silly ass effort to use them by themselves by doing a single joint, the majority of the muscles in your body are not going to be maximally recruited. This is why attempting to isolate muscles is silly ass bodybuilder crap. It's not how the human body works. It's a completely unnatural concept for the body. Your body is not designed that way. And when you look at stuff like this is a perfect example of why this makes sense. It makes sense when you look at the way the muscles work. So in light of that, you have to look at it from that perspective. You have to look at it and say, okay, now I see why this happens. So someone say, well, what can I do to get the fullest range of motion, everything in it? Well, you need some exercise where you jump under load. Hypothetically, we didn't see any comparisons, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say if you do a lot of squatting and deadlifting, your calves are probably going to reach close to, reasonable development for your genetics. But in theory, if someone really wanted the fullest range of motion possible, you would need both full knee extension and you would need the dorsiflexion and everything involved. So you would probably need an exercise where you drop down and jump up in the air. So like a jumping squat, a power clean, right? These exercises to where you basically squat down at some point and then you get up onto your tippy toes, right? That would be technically the most effective calf exercises in theory, but you are going to use considerably less weight and you're already getting the two other functions. Honestly, we could debate a lot about what's going to give you the best development, but I would say, realistically, if someone is squatting and deadlifting, if they're throwing in power cleans or something also, if you're focusing on all three of those lifts, I seriously doubt adding calf raises is going to give you a particularly significant amount of calf growth. It might. But at the end of the day, people need to realize calves are very genetic. They're very genetic. You're stuck with what you have. They'll grow, but they're not going to grow massively. They're not going to grow massively. Before people say, well, fat guys, really? I've known a guy who did powerlifting and bodybuilding both, who was a 400-pound fat guy in his teens, dieted down, and he still had no calves. He had no calves. So even that's not always true. That's a myth. That is a myth. There are fat people with no calves. Still genetics. But this, again, is another example of why when you look at it from a practical perspective, all of these attempts to isolate muscles and think that muscles perform only one function or only work at one joint the majority of the time is going to produce subpar results. Focus on the big exercises, put your efforts into getting big overall, and the majority of the muscles in your body are going to get to about as much development as you're probably going to get without specializing in them, right? And calves are no different. And people need to remember at the end of the day, though, calves are very, very, very genetic. That's why you see guys like Omar, who's like still team no calves, even though he does do squat and deadlift. Hell, he even does calf raises. He just doesn't have the genetics to have big calves. You only have so many muscle fibers in them, and they don't respond particularly well always to training. And when they do, people tend to way overtrain them to the point with too much high volume, high rep, lightweight stuff that they end up still not getting the results that they want. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.